All right, it's the final video for your first 2 weeks of class. It's Quadratic Formula, video 4. And this is usually what people like. I mentioned in completing the square, sometimes it's really messy to complete the square. Well, what somebody did once upon a time is they completed the square using arbitrary values A, B, and C. And this is actually what you get. If completing the square, you don't actually use numbers, but use letters, this is the answer. That's where the quadratic formula comes from. So here's how to use it. The number one thing for using complete the square, the number one thing for using the quadratic formula is be very careful with your simplifying. Okay, that's going to get you most of the time. So here we go. Solve part 1. 2x squared plus 5x plus 3 equals 0. Okay? And again, you could try to use the AC method. Maybe you can factor this. 2 times 6 is 6. Sorry, 2 times 3 is 6. Wait, is there something that multiplies to 6 that adds to 5? And yes, there is. 2 and 3. So you could use factoring for this. If you wanted to, if you were a little bit of a masochist or maybe just a math lover, you could also use completing the square. Divide both sides by 2, and you get your new b. Find b over 2 squared, blah, blah, blah. Completing the square. And this one's going to be really messy. Let's use the quadratic formula. So again, I highly recommend that when you're using the quadratic formula, you write it down again. So it's negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. What's our a value? A is the coefficient of the x squared, that's 2. B value, and really watch out for negatives. If this were a minus 5x, it'd be negative 5. But because it's plus 5x, b is just 5. C is just a constant, just 3. And make sure it's in this form before you write down what a, b, and c are. Now we just replace them. Negative 5, negative 5. Plus or minus the square root of 5 squared, minus 4 times a, which is 5, times c, which is 3. All divided by 2 times a, which is 2. Okay, just replace all the letters with what they equal. And be very careful with parentheses, be very careful with minuses. Kind of lucky to not have any minuses here, but we'll have it in part B. And now you simplify. Watch for order of operations. This inside, you can probably use your calculator. It's going to be 25 minus 60 is negative 35, I believe. The bottom is 2 times 2 is 4. Didn't I just say this can be factored? This can be factored, then... Yeah, this is why, so I'm demonstrating at this very moment what happens if you're not careful, okay? So let's do this real quick. I just want to make sure that this is right. B squared minus 4ac, b is 5, so it becomes 25, minus 4 times a, which is 2. I wrote b. It should be a 2 right here. Excellent demonstration of how easy it is to make mistakes with the quadratic formula. I could just re-record this video, but I think it's important to see me making mistakes as well. This becomes 4 times 2 is 8, times 3 is 24. 25 minus 24 is just a nice 1. Very much better. All right, sometimes you'll get messy stuff in here. I just know that because we could have factored, that it's not going to be messy. So we get minus 5 plus or minus the square root of 1. Well, the square root of 1 is just 1. And now again, if you can simplify it, this is where we split things up. It becomes minus 5 minus 1 over 4, and minus 5 plus 1. That's what the plus or minus means. Plus or minus. And now we just keep simplifying. Minus 5 minus 1 is minus 6 over 4. Plus 1 is minus 4 over 4. Now we can reduce that to become negative 3 halves. And negative 1. So this is a relatively nice complete quadratic formula problem. If we completed the square, it'd be really messy. And if we factored it, it would be pretty easy, provided you know the AC method. If you don't know the AC method, factoring here is going to be pretty hard. Quadratic formula, again, will always work. So this is the good case. I'm going to show you a harder problem just so you have exposure to it. So if you're doing the homework and get stuck, you can look up the video and see a harder version of the problem. I'm going to try to do that from time to time. So let's do part B. Part B is 4 plus 1 over x minus 1 over x squared equals 0. And you might say, hold up. We can't use a quadratic formula here. This isn't a quadratic. This is a rational equationization. And I would say, first of all, I'm very impressed that you're recognizing that this is not a quadratic formula and is indeed a rational equation. But if you ever have fractions and variables in the denominator, what you need to do is get rid of that. So the way we get rid of variables in the denominator is multiply both sides of the equation by the LCD. All right. And you're probably not going to see any of these in this section. I don't think I included any of them from the homework. This is actually from the book, but I'm just kind of using it to tie a bunch of things together and show you what's harder here. So the LCD here is x squared. The LCD is just, if you were combining all these into fractions, what would your denominator have to be? That's the LCD. So if we multiply everything by x squared, that's the same as x squared over 1, right? So this becomes 4x squared plus x squared over x minus x squared over x squared equals 0 times x squared. Anything times 0 is still 0. And now we simplify, right? This becomes 4x squared. One of these cancels, and it just left with an x over 1. And then both of these cancel. And aha! We have a quadratic now. So now we can use the quadratic formula. It's in the right size, right form, right? There needs to be a 0 over here. And we can identify that a is 4. B is the coefficient of x. And again, sometimes if it doesn't look like there's a coefficient, there is. It's 1. And C is the final number. Do not forget that negative. It's very important. So solve this. We use a quadratic formula. I recommend writing it down every time. Negative b. There's even a song. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root b squared minus 4 times ac all over 2a. I promise I'll never sing. No, I don't promise I'll never sing that again. But I probably won't sing that again, at least in these videos. Find me around campus if you're local. Maybe you can get exposed to that. And now we just replace everything. Negative b is a negative 1. Plus or minus the square root of b squared, that's 1 squared, minus 4 times a, which is 4, times c, which is negative 1, all divided by 2 times a, which is 4. And now simplify, and hope I don't make the simplification error that I did last time. And we get negative 1 plus or minus, type the inside into a calculator, 1 squared minus negative 16. It's 1 squared plus 16, which is 17. The denominator is 8. This time's a little different because this square root doesn't simplify. We try to simplify it. Is there a factorization of 17 that has a perfect square? Think 4, 9, 25, 36, all the perfect squares. And no, there's no way to split up that 17 with factorization. So it's about as simplified as it can get. But usually we'll still split up the fraction like we do with complex numbers as negative 1/8 plus or minus the square root of 17 over 8 is usually how we write this as our final answer. Okay, this is kind of the worst case scenario. And notice the worst case scenario in this case is really not that bad. Okay, that's basically it. All right, that's the second week of class. If you have any questions, email me, send me a message on Canvas or Slack. You hopefully get the drill by now. Anyway, should be able to do problems 38 through 42 even. I could have just listed 38, 40, and 42, but here we are. All right, enjoy.